I'm Washington correspondent Margaret Chadbourn. This week on Capitol Conversations, a one-on-one with New York Democratic Congressman John Mannion. The former teacher turned lawmaker flipped his seat for Democrats' last election. Now, as the midterms are approaching, he's sounding the alarm about efforts he says are undermining confidence in the election system.
The perpetuation of those false narratives is really dangerous and hurts the stability of our democracy.
And with the House delivering a rare rebuke to President Trump by passing a war powers resolution, he shares his concerns about the conflict in the Middle East.
We need an exit strategy, and we need partners around the world, many of whom I think we've broken the trust of, to come together and hold Iran accountable and negotiate a sound deal that keeps nuclear weapons out of their hands.
Plus, voters are under pressure from higher prices on everything from gas to groceries. His message on affordability, how the Trump administration's economic policies are getting it wrong, and what Democrats will do if they win in November.
Let's develop sound trade policy, particularly in the North American corridor here, and make sure that we're keeping dollars in people's pockets.
This Capitol Conversation starts with the state of America's elections and whether voters should have confidence in the system. Congressman Mannion, thank you so much for your time today, being with us, sitting down to go over what's happening on Capitol Hill and what you're interested in policy-wise. I wanted to start out with the upcoming elections, election integrity. One thing that's really fascinating about you won one of the closest races in New York history, but you also flipped your district in 2024, which brought you into Congress. Any concerns going into the midterms about election integrity?
I absolutely have concerns, and I hope I can give a quick answer here. So that's correct. I was a public school teacher for a long time. I ran first in 2018. I lost by 2%. Then I ran in 2020. I won by 5%. And in 2022, I was redistricted, and 125,000 votes cast in a state Senate race. I won by 10 votes. And I can tell you that out of all three of those elections, and then I was fortunate enough to win this seat in 2024, that myself and my volunteers got to watch the elections process and how professionally run our elections are in a bipartisan way. So we went through a hand recount and an absentee count, and I got to see firsthand how our elections work and that they're triple checked, that they're valid. So I have great frustration to hear the President of the United States and others either remain silent or, echo his statement about the fact that our elections are fraudulent. We know that there is no widespread voter fraud. This has gone through the courts multiple times. It went through the courts following the 2020 presidential election. And we don't have non-citizens voting. So the perpetuation of those false narratives is really dangerous and hurts the stability of our democracy. Right now, we have a Republican trifecta in Washington, the Senate, the House, and the presidency. These individuals were elected, and as we approach the midterms, I know that when I was a state senator, we certainly invested to make sure that we had the staffing and the technology to conduct our elections in a critical, way, a professional way, and that is happening around this country. The boards of elections in New York State are bipartisan. There's an equal number of Republican and Democratic staff, and there are Republican and Democratic elections commissioners. So to push this false narrative is so dangerous, and I remind people all the time, we just had elections last night. You hear zero about the integrity of those elections because the people running in them understand that they are valid. Special elections, primaries, referendums, all over the place. But I will say this, and I don't know when this is going to be out there, but California takes a while to count their mail-in votes. And unfortunately, that is being politicized and weaponized, and it perpetuates this false narrative about the fact that our elections are not valid, and I know that they are. The courts agree, And it's very dangerous to perpetuate that message.
And do your voters back at home agree? I mean, do they have faith in this election system?
You don't hear any local Central New York or Mohawk Valley Republicans talking about election fraud, because the people in my district overwhelmingly understand that our elections are working. They have faith in the election system. They have faith in democracy. They have faith in the people that run these elections. So other places around this country that might be popular, it is not popular in Central New York, because our election commissioners, again, are representatives from both parties, and they also are typically members of the community who have earned the trust of the people. So people are validated every time they go into a polling site and see how professionally run our elections are.
And the president has actually mentioned or indicated as such that he might have some sort of interference in the upcoming midterms. Are you concerned about what he might do, National Guard at voting booths?
Yeah.
What are your concerns?
I'm absolutely concerned. The policies of the president are extremely unpopular. That has been well documented. And I've been in elected office for a few terms now. When the president, when these executive orders started coming out that were clearly unconstitutional or unlawful and unpopular, destroying collective bargaining rights, ending birthright citizenship, we could go on and on and on, the erratic trade policy, I knew that the people of this country would reject a lot of those, and certainly the overextension of the executive powers. So as somebody who runs in elections, this is what democracies are, is that the voters will then stand up and say something with their vote. So what we've seen is the president's popularity go way down. Many of the Republicans on multiple issues will sit silent. And what we've heard is that we're going to see at the ballot box many more Democrats get elected, flipping the House, putting the Senate in play. And that's when the president makes a phone call to Greg Abbott and says, we need mid-decade redistricting. Also, the message around the SAVE Act or the Save America Act. If someone wants to see my identification and my son and I have the same name when I go into a polling site, I absolutely would show that ID. But the Save America Act or the SAVE Act, these are not that. These are pieces of legislation where we as voters have already proved our citizenship for women whose names have changed or people who've changed their names for other reason or changed addresses. Those voter rolls could be purged and purged unfairly, and when somebody shows up to vote, they may not be eligible to vote at that site. So my point is this. Our elections are working. The president is trying to push a false narrative around it. The courts and the evidence say that he is absolutely not truthful in doing that. But what he is effective in doing is sowing doubt into people's minds that this is actually accurate. He is the duly elected president of the United States with a majority of House and the majority in the Senate. And how did that happen? It seems to be only when the president is on the ballot and loses, or when accountability is coming, does he have issues with our elections. And as far as mail-in ballots go, he voted by mail.
That's correct. And you seem pretty confident in Democrats, their chances of success come November, possibly flipping back the House, even gaining the seats they need in the Senate. How does your party need to have a positive agenda or type of platform that's not just anti-Trump?
Absolutely. So listen, I usually focus on myself. I rarely talk about my opponents when I've run. This is my 5th election. And I'm from Syracuse. I'm from Central New York. I know where most people are coming from. We lost a lot of jobs in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. We're caring people. We have tough winters. It's a great place to raise your kids. People want affordability and opportunity, so I always focus on those things. And I cannot speak for the party. I flipped a seat that was held by Republicans for 42 out of the last 46 years. But I know where Central New Yorkers are coming from, and I really mostly focus on that. I do know that the people of this country need to know that myself and others are fighting for everyday Americans. We're fighting for people who can't afford to pay their bills, who have seen declining wages or stagnant wages. And I was a former union president. I was a teacher for a long time. My last 8 years of teaching, I was also a teacher association president while still teaching in the classroom. So I negotiated contracts, and I was fighting to make sure that people had fair wages, benefits, so that they could find their American dream. My father was on public assistance. He lost his father at a young age. It's harder and harder for people to make their American dream work, and that's where whether it's me or members of my party have to go. We need to end these tariffs. We need to end the war. We need to adjust the tax structure where the ultra wealthy aren't getting even wealthier, and honestly leveraging the system in their benefit. And that's what I think our message is. It's to fight for everyday Americans, because honestly, they deserve better. They deserve better economically, and they deserve better when it comes to our standing around the world.
Congressman, you just mentioned tariffs. You sit on the Agriculture Committee. What is your top focus there when it comes to delivering for Central New Yorkers?
Well, listen, New York agriculture is something that isn't the first thing people think about when they think about New York. But agriculture is our largest industry, and where I represent, we have a very robust dairy industry. We have very robust specialty crops in the areas of grapes, strawberries, and apples. So when it comes to these trade policies, 40% of New York apples are exported to Canada. It's that kind of example where we need to reverse erratic trade policy, rebuild that trust that exists. The reason America is such a reliable trade partner is that we can be trusted. So New York farmers, often we don't have massive farms like we do in other places in this country, and we do have a very circular agricultural economy when it comes to feed and it comes to dairy. So I want to make sure that our farmers are getting their fair share, that they have access to USDA and the programs that are available to them. So I'm very proud to be on the Agriculture Committee, very proud to be from Central New York, and I want to make sure that some of our larger farms and our row crops that seem to get the benefit many of the times as it comes to legislation or funding, that our New York farmers are getting their fair share and being treated fairly, and it's really an honor to represent them.
Turning to a few topics that are facing lawmakers back from recess. Right now, the ceasefire with Iran, it's very delicate, it's fragile. What are you watching most closely in the Middle East to show any signs of that conflict winding down?
Well, first of all, only Congress has the right to declare war, and there's a reason for that. The reason is that, the founders of this country wanted to make sure that the people who are most closely connected to those that would be fighting these wars are the ones making that decision, and not someone in an executive position or formerly, like with the British Empire, a monarch. So I think we can agree on many things, regardless of party. Number one, we have to support our military members who are keeping us safe every single day. Number two, Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. Number three, when we engage in such serious business, we should make sure that a compelling argument is made to the American people, that it's made to Congress, and that they authorize it, and that we build a coalition. And unfortunately, what we've seen with this conflict is the president has really disregarded all of those things and jumped into a military conflict that there may not be an easy exit strategy out of. So let's make sure. First of all, we want peace. We want peace, and we want good standing of the United States around the world. I feel like we've lost some of that. So I hope that there can be a peaceful agreement, a diplomatic agreement between us, Iran, and real oversight that they never do have the ability to develop a nuclear weapon. But I'm afraid that we have jumped into this war of choice for I'm not sure all of the reasons, because those were not clearly defined for members of Congress, nor has an exit strategy been clearly defined. I don't believe we can bomb our way into diplomacy, and I'm afraid that that's still happening right now, an attempt to do that.
I know you don't fully support the way the president has gone about the war. In terms of how the House might react, there's been a push to do these war powers resolutions, take those types of votes. Any chance that Republicans will join you on that effort?
Well, it has to. You know, this is a privileged resolution. A few weeks ago, we had votes canceled on the last day of session because we would have been voting on a war powers resolution, and now we're back to be voting on that again. I certainly will be voting for it, in favor of the authority falling under Congress and to cease, you know, these activities immediately. So I do believe so. I think there are many Republicans that have already shown with previous war powers votes that they have come over and voted with our side. If we are talking about the will of the American people, this is a very unpopular war, and I'm quite confident that unfortunately many Republicans are voting against these war powers resolutions for fear of you know, what the president may do in a primary election or otherwise that they you know, would be in the future. So that's not the way it's supposed to go. But I do call upon my colleagues again to not just stand up for their party or even you know, their constituents, which is what they should be doing, and following the will of those constituents, but standing up for the House of Representatives as an institution in the fact that war powers have been enshrined to us, and there's a reason for that, many reasons, and those are good reasons.
Do you feel that lawmakers have been properly briefed by the White House on Iran? Is there anything regarding cost or the mission in the Middle East that you want to be hearing that you're not getting right now?
I believe we should be provided with more details, and the president's excuse that we can't be trusted absolutely is just what I said. It's an excuse. You know, in speaking with some of the ranking members who are I'm closer to on the Democratic side on the relevant committees that have a higher level of briefing than I do, they would say the same thing, which is they have not seen a compelling argument made for justification that there was an imminent threat against this country, nor have they seen a comprehensive strategy to get us out of there and still hold Iran accountable. You know, when the president came in to this conflict, he first started talking about regime change, and now we may have people even at the more extreme end of the political spectrum that we have to negotiate with now.
If tensions with Iran continue, what should Americans expect at the pump this summer? The Strait of Hormuz is still impacted.
This is a costly war. It's costly in American lives. It's costly in our reputation around the world, and the amount of equipment and weaponry that we have spent billions and billions of dollars on, and actually could put us in a more precarious position around the world, we have to rebuild. So listen, this is why war is serious business, and why the authority falls under Congress is that we should not jump into these things you know, flippantly. It's easy to start a war. It's hard to end one. People were promised by this president when he was running for office this time that he would not get us into forever wars. And again, I want what's best for the United States of America, and that includes a non-nuclear Iran. But we need an exit strategy, and we need partners around the world, many of whom I think we've broken the trust of, to come together and hold Iran accountable and negotiate a sound deal that keeps nuclear weapons out of their hands.
Sticking to that pocketbook theme, though, what's one policy you think voters would actually feel would impact their wallets that Democrats could accomplish before November?
Well, listen, even when President Biden was in office and now President Trump was talking about inflation at that time, every president would flip a switch and all of a sudden just lower inflation. But there's lots of factors involved, supply chain and otherwise. We've seen the cost of gasoline go up by 50%. And there's lots of variables, but there's one main variable, and what we can attribute that increase of $1.50 a gallon when it was once $3 and now it's $4.50 to the war in Iran and the closing of the Strait of Hormuz. That should be of the highest priority, that we work with our partners, our regional partners, our allies, to come up with a resolution here, open the strait. This should have been considered before the president took action, and I'm afraid that he did not consider it to the extent that he needed to. I do not know if he was briefed on this. I've heard that he may have, but he should have listened to the advisors and the history as it relates to the Strait of Hormuz and the oil that flows out of there. It's costly for everyone. So when it comes to reasserting our authority with a war powers resolution or otherwise, that's something we can do. I've also voted on resolutions that came to the floor as a result of discharge petitions on reasserting our trade powers. We knew that the tariffs from the president were not legal tariffs, and it took a year for the Supreme Court to finally have the final word on that, and as a result, people's costs are up. So let's develop sound trade policy, particularly in the North American corridor here, and make sure that we're keeping dollars in people's pockets and they can afford to buy gasoline.
The Trump administration is effectively trying to wind down the education department and transfer their responsibilities to other agencies. What about this approach here did you disagree with? You're on the education committee, and why does it matter for your constituents?
Well, I've been a public educator for almost 30 years. I was an AP biology, science teacher, biology and chemistry. So I've seen the good that public education can do, and it is the great equalizer. I disagree with the president's efforts to dismantle the Department of Education, particularly when it comes to our students that have IEPs and the implementation and the funding that comes along with IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, and the Office of Civil Rights to make sure that students and staff are not discriminated against in an educational setting. I don't believe that the work that's being done there is going to be done in a better way. The other thing that I will mention here is that there's certainly an attempt to privatize public education, and when it comes to that, I'm opposed to this. I certainly support our private schools, and there is some mechanisms for funding public school or private schools, but my fear is that there's many that are looking at privatization of education as their next business practice and part of their plan, and they're looking at these taxpayer dollars that are intended to educate all of our youth and have those being stripped away at the expense of public education students. So I'm a true believer in public education, and I've seen the good that happens there. It is the great equalizer. We have unique programs in our public schools in upstate New York, and we love our public schools, and they're very successful. So we have to continue to invest in public ed and not allow the wolves at the gate to pounce on those dollars and shift them away from the systems that were in place to make sure we educate every kid, including kids that have challenges.
Before you came to Congress and got involved in politics, you were a teacher for many decades. You've spoken about this as we've sat down here today. What skills translate from inside the classroom to the halls of Congress?
Well, first of all, I know how to deal with juvenile behavior, so that's a skill that I developed over 30 years. Being a teacher, and we can all look back to the teachers that we've had. And some people would say, this was a great teacher, this one wasn't so great. But the number one trait that all those teachers had is that they cared. They cared about their students. And when you care about your students, that means you make sure you're prepared. You build those relationships, which you just can't establish. They're built over time on trust. And you have to be on your toes, you have to be nimble, you have to compromise, you have to negotiate, and you have to maintain those relationships even if you don't agree. And then outside of the skills I developed in the classroom, as a leader of teachers, I also had to negotiate contracts and go through the grievance process, and I believe that was helpful in my understanding of federal and state education law, and again, the ability to compromise and work through challenging situations and find a resolution. So, teaching is the greatest profession in the world. When people ask me if I miss it, my quick answer is yes. It's just incredibly gratifying. There's no substitute for it. And one of the best things I get to do as an elected official is go back to those classrooms and meet with those students, again, whether it's pre-K all the way up through higher ed.
Congressman, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's all for this week's Capitol Conversation. For more one-on-one interviews, check out the videos available here on the app. In Washington, Margaret Chadbourn.